6 months after everything imploded, the digital ghost of Ethan popped up on my LinkedIn. A notification: Ethan Miller viewed your profile. 3 days later, a message. Short, professional, asking to meet for coffee, to clear the air. I let it sit for 4 days. Let him stew. Then I agreed. A small coffee shop, neutral territory, not too far from my apartment. He was 7 minutes late. The suit, I noticed, was cheaper than I remembered, a bit off the rack. The expensive watch was gone, replaced by some generic fitness tracker. His hair, once meticulously styled, was longer, past stylish, bordering on neglected. The confidence, that well-rehearsed smirk, was still there, mostly. But it had cracks now, like a poorly patched wall. We ordered. I paid for my drink immediately, out of habit. He hesitated, then paid for his. We settled at a small corner table. Before his cup even touched the surface, he started talking. I've done a lot of reflecting, he began, his voice a little strained. Since everything happened at Viridian Capital, it wasn't fair to you. I see that now. I made some choices I'm not proud of. I just sipped my coffee. Hot, black, no nonsense. Like most things in my life. He continued, his gaze drifting. I've sent out probably 200 applications. Had a few interviews. Nothing's landed. When you get let go for cause, word travels. People talk. Background checks, you know. He paused, took a deep breath. His hand, I noticed, trembled slightly as he picked up his cup. My wife left 3 months ago. Took the kids to Virginia. I've burned through most of our savings keeping the mortgage paid. Another couple months and I have to sell the house. I set my cup down. Looked him straight in the eye. What do you want, Ethan? His jaw tightened, just a fraction. I was hoping you might help. Maybe a reference, or just an agreement, to not actively torpedo me if anyone calls. I just need someone to not make things worse. 10 seconds of silence stretched between us. I watched him shift in his seat, the practiced composure visibly fraying. Then I leaned forward. Do you remember slide 4? I asked. He blinked. What? The Titan presentation, I clarified. Slide 4. Projected compliance outcomes. You stood in front of 14 people and read numbers off a screen you hadn't reviewed. The consultant asked about confidence intervals. Basic question. Any competent analyst could have answered it. I paused, letting my words sink in. You couldn't. Because you never looked. Because you assumed someone else would do the work, and you'd take the credit. His face went pale. You didn't take credit because you were under pressure, I continued, my voice even, controlled. You did it because you thought you could get away with it. You looked at me, in that corner desk, eating turkey sandwiches and keeping my head down, and you saw an opportunity. A resource to exploit. You did it 17 times. You forwarded my emails, presented my slides, took my analysis to leadership dinners, and nodded while they congratulated you. That wasn't survival, Ethan. That was strategy. He started to interrupt, a weak protest forming on his lips. I didn't let him. Eventually, someone checks your math. Eventually, someone sits in a meeting and lets you hang yourself with rope you spent 4 months tying. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill for my coffee, a generous tip. I looked down at him. I'm not going to torpedo you. I'm not going to make calls. What I'm going to do is nothing. Same thing you did for the analyst before me. Same thing you would have done if our positions were reversed. Nothing. I turned towards the door, then stopped. My hand was already on the cool metal of the handle. I looked back at him one last time. I have someone at home who can't afford my generosity. And that folder, the documentation, timestamps, files, Slack history, it's still on a drive in my apartment. Not because I need it. Because you never know when someone might want to verify a reference. I walked out into the cold air. But to truly understand that moment, you have to go back. Back to the hum of the server rack, the ticking clock of a custody battle, and the day Ethan Miller decided I was his meal ticket. Viridian Capital, 42nd floor, downtown. It's a compliance-heavy firm. Every file access gets logged. Every shared folder tracks who opened what and when. Every email is archived. We build the predictive models that keep clients out of federal crosshairs. When my projections are accurate, which they've been 94% of the time for the last 3 years, executives buy boats, and nobody remembers my name. That's not a complaint. That's just how it is. I badge in at 7:14 every morning. Not 7:15, not 7:20. 7:14, my daughter's before-school program opens at 7:05, and dropping her off takes 9 minutes if there's no Houston traffic. I've got a 7-year-old at home who needs consistency. And family court? They don't mess around when you're a single dad trying to prove you're stable enough for permanent guardianship. Every pickup, every schedule, every routine gets scrutinized by caseworkers paid to find problems. Miss one, and you're explaining yourself to someone already skeptical that a guy working 60 hours a week can handle full custody. The backpack in my trunk isn't mine. Neither is the margin for error. My desk sits in the corner, wedged between a filing cabinet nobody opens and the server room. The hum never stops. 42 hertz, constant, like living next to a highway. New hires last about 3 weeks before requesting transfers. I've been there 6 years. You get used to it. You get used to a lot of things. 3 monitors, angled just so. A legal pad for tracking bugs in red ink. No photos. No motivational posters. No personal touches that might spark conversations I don't have time for. Family court loves stability. It also loves not seeing your personal life spread across a shared office where anyone with a phone can photograph it and submit it as evidence of instability. Sarah, our division head, runs a tight ship. Former auditor. Climbed by being smarter and meaner than everyone blocking her path. She respects results and despises excuses. We've had maybe a dozen conversations in 2 years. Most of them involved her telling me to fix something someone else broke. Michael, one of the legacy models, is throwing errors. Handle it. No, please. No, thank you. Just tasks. And I handled them. Every single time. Then Ethan showed up. He arrived from the Atlanta office in March. Director-level hire, strategic initiatives lead, corporate speak for. We're not sure what he does, but he interviewed well and knows someone on the board. MBA from a school that cost more than a house. Previous roles at firms with names that sounded made up. The first thing I noticed was his handshake, too firm, the kind that says, I've read books about dominance and practiced in the mirror. The second thing was his watch, expensive, the kind that cost more than my car. The third thing, the one that actually mattered? He never wrote anything down. Not once. In every meeting, he'd nod, say, great point, or let's circle back on that. Then 3 hours later, he'd email someone, usually me, asking for a quick recap. Within 2 weeks, Ethan figured out the game. I was the guy who built the models that made quarterly reports look good. The guy who worked weekends without being asked. The guy who could explain complex statistical frameworks in emails executives could forward without embarrassment. And I was the guy nobody noticed because I didn't play golf with the vice president of operations or network at the Thai place where everyone pretended to care about each other's weekends. Useful and invisible. To a guy like Ethan, that wasn't a flaw. It was a feature. The first time I realized something was off, I was sitting in a conference room, 3 chairs from the end, watching him present my work to the executive team. He'd asked to look at my regulatory risk presentation the week before. Came by my desk around 3 p.m. Leaned on the partition with that casual confidence guys like him always have. Said he wanted to add strategic context before the leadership review. Made it sound collaborative. Made it sound like he was doing me a favor by elevating my work to the executive level. I sent it over without thinking twice. We were supposed to be on the same team, right? 2 days later, there I was, while Ethan walked leadership through my slides, my analysis, my recommendations, word for word. He made eye contact with the chief financial officer and said, "I really dug into this over the weekend." The findings were substantial. The CFO nodded. Ms. Chen, the VP of Operations, leaned forward. Sarah asked about the methodology behind one of the projections. Standard question. Technical, but not complicated. Ethan smiled, leaned back, and said, "Let's not get stuck in the weeds here. The important thing is the strategic direction." Translation: I have no idea how any of this works. The meeting ended. Everyone shook hands. Ethan got shoulder pats and comments about strong work. The CFO told him it was exactly the kind of proactive analysis we need. I got nothing. Not even a footnote. Not even eye contact. I walked back to my desk and sat there, staring at my monitor. At the time, I figured maybe it was a miscommunication. Maybe he'd just forgotten to credit me. Happens, right? People get busy. Things slip through the cracks. Wrong. After that first presentation theft, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I opened a folder on my personal drive at home. Started saving things. Slack timestamps showing when he'd asked for files. Email chains where he'd requested quick reviews that turned into full presentations. File version histories showing who created what and when. Not because I had some master plan. Not because I was plotting revenge. Because when you've spent 2 years in family court fighting for custody, you learn that documentation is the only thing that matters when someone's word is stacked against yours. Judges don't care about your feelings or your version of events. They care about time-stamped evidence. The second time Ethan presented my work, I was ready. He'd asked for my quarterly compliance analysis, said he needed it for a leadership review. Slack message at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday, "Hey, Michael, can you shoot me that Q2 compliance analysis? Want to add some executive context before the board review next week." I sent it over at 5:02 p.m., 8 minutes before I had to leave for pickup. 3 days later, Monday morning leadership meeting. I wasn't invited initially, but someone from operations had to drop out, and they needed a body for quorum. I sat in the back corner. Ethan stood up front. Click to the first slide, my formatting, my color scheme, my executive summary. He spent 12 minutes explaining my risk assessment framework like he'd invented it. Used phrases like, "what I found during my analysis," and "based on my research." At one point, he made a recommendation that directly contradicted something I'd explicitly warned against in my original notes he'd apparently deleted before presenting. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked who actually built the model. They just nodded. Third time, same story. Fourth time, fifth time, always the same pattern. Request materials, claim he needed context or wanted to add strategic value, then show up and take full credit. Sometimes he'd CC me afterward, thanking me for support on the technical details, corporate speak for thanks for doing the work while I took the credit. By month 4, I'd logged 17 separate incidents. Each saved, time-stamped, backed up to an encrypted drive at home. Each file labeled. Each email preserved with full headers. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. I just knew I wanted it documented. Ethan started getting invited to leadership dinners. Got a corner office with an actual window while I stayed next to the server hum. Got his name added to the high-potential list that determined who got fast-tracked for VP roles. Meanwhile, my performance review said things like consistent and reliable, corporate code words for this person will never be promoted, but we're not going to fire them either. The moment that made everything crystal clear happened in April. Quarterly review meeting. Big conference room on the executive floor with the good coffee and the chairs that don't squeak. Sarah pulled up a slide showing our division's accuracy rates on predictive compliance forecasts. 94% hit rate over 3 years. Best in the company. Better than the teams in Chicago and Los Angeles combined. The kind of numbers that get referenced in board meetings and investor calls. She looked around the room and said, "Ethan, your team's done excellent work here. Walk us through the methodology that's been driving these results." Your team, like Ethan, had a team. Like anyone other than me had touched these models in the last 18 months. I was sitting 3 rows back, next to a guy from compliance who was scrolling through his phone. Ethan stood up, smoothed his tie, the expensive one, probably $300, and spent 4 minutes explaining work I had done entirely alone. Talked about our approach to variance analysis and the framework we developed. Used we about 30 times in 4 minutes. At one point, he made eye contact with me and smiled. Not a thank you smile. A testing smile. The kind that says, "I'm checking if you're going to say anything, and we both know you won't." I didn't. The presentation ended. Executives nodded. The CFO said something about exactly the kind of proactive work that sets us apart. The strategy chief asked if the methodology could be scaled. After the meeting, Ms. Chen stopped Ethan in the hallway, about 10 feet away from me. She clapped him on the shoulder and called him a rising star. Said the board had been asking about him. Said there were big opportunities on the horizon for people who deliver like this. They were standing right there. Neither of them looked my way once. Not a glance. Not a nod. I might as well have been part of the furniture. Ethan started scheduling late meetings. Quick syncs at 5:30, 6 o'clock, sometimes 6:30 or later. Said it showed commitment. Said this was when the real work gets done, after all the distractions clear out. My calendar has a standing appointment at 5:10 p.m. that I don't negotiate with. Not with directors. Not with VPs. Not with anyone. Because if I miss pickup at the after-school program, it's not just, "Oops, sorry, had a work thing." It's a documented incident. It's a phone call to a caseworker. It's evidence that maybe I'm not as stable and consistent as I claim to be in court filings. The first couple times Ethan scheduled evening meetings, I explained I had a hard stop at 5:10. Didn't elaborate. Didn't explain why. Just said it wasn't flexible and I'd review any materials first thing the next morning. The third time I declined, he made a comment in front of Sarah. We were at the coffee station. Sarah was getting her second or third cup. Ethan walked up, smiled at both of us, and said, "Michael, I know you've got bandwidth issues with the evening meetings, but we really need all hands on deck for the priority client project. Team effort, you know. Bandwidth issues, like I was overbooked. Like I was the problem." I smiled. Said I'd make sure to review all materials first thing in the morning so we could stay on schedule. Said I'd send him a full briefing by 8 a.m. the next day. Kept my voice even. Professional. The caseworker had already warned me. Any hint of instability, any suggestion that work was interfering with parental responsibilities, and the judge would hear about it. So I smiled. Said I'd handle it. And left at 5:08 that day. Same as always. For months in, something happened that changed the calculation entirely. The Titan account. We had a client presentation scheduled for late July. Big deal. Titan Energy. One of Viridian's largest accounts, worth $3.5 million annually. Not the biggest fish, but definitely not a minnow. The kind of account that makes executives nervous because losing it would mean painful conversations with the board. They operated in 8 states, managed infrastructure worth billions, and faced constant regulatory scrutiny. They needed better predictive models. I'd built that system for them. The models worked. Their compliance penalty exposure had dropped by 73%. They'd avoided 2 major enforcement actions that hit their competitors. Sarah assigned Ethan to lead the midterm review presentation. Made sense from her perspective. He was the director. Had the title. He'd been doing all those leadership dinners. He'd been CC'd on all my status updates. What she didn't know, what nobody knew except me, was that Ethan had never touched the code, never reviewed the methodology, never asked a single question about the underlying data. All he'd done was forward my status updates to leadership with his name at the top. 2 weeks before the presentation, Ethan stopped by my desk. Same lean on the partition. Same casual smirk. "Hey, Michael, quick favor. Think you could throw together some materials for the Titan meeting? I've been absolutely slammed with strategic planning stuff and could really use some support on the technical details." He was already checking his phone, only half paying attention. I asked him a simple question about the regression model we'd used for Titan's Q2 compliance forecast. Basic stuff. What weighting did we use for historical variance versus current trend data? He blinked. Shifted his weight. "Let's not get bogged down in the weeds here, Michael. Big picture is what they care about." I told him I'd put something together. He nodded, clapped me on the shoulder, first time he'd ever touched me, actually, and walked off. That night, I sat in my apartment with a cold energy drink. The first one in 3 months, because I was careful about everything during the custody evaluation. And I thought about what happens when you give someone enough rope. Ethan had no exit strategy, no backup plan. He'd built his entire position at Viridian Capital on the assumption that I'd keep quietly feeding him work while he took the credit. He'd never considered what would happen if that assumption turned out to be wrong. Why would he? It had been working perfectly for 6 months. From his perspective, he'd found a system that generated results without effort. A machine that kept running as long as nobody looked under the hood. But here's the thing about machines. They work fine until someone changes the input. Then everything breaks in ways nobody predicted. I decided to find out what would happen if I changed the input. Not cut it. Not sabotage it. Just modified it slightly. Introduced some noise into the system. See what happened when Ethan had to stand in front of executives and explain something he didn't understand without someone there to bail him out. Here's the thing about predictive models, they're complicated. Dozens of variables interacting. Multiple data sources. Layered assumptions. If you understand the architecture, you can explain it. You can defend your choices. If you don't understand it, you're just reading words off slides and praying nobody asks a follow-up question. And when someone does ask, you're dead in the water. I started building 2 versions of the Titan presentation. The real one sat in my personal workspace, a drive Ethan didn't know existed. Clean analysis, accurate projections, proper confidence intervals, methodology documentation that would hold up under audit. Everything Titan would expect from a firm they were paying $3.5 million a year. I triple-checked every calculation. The draft version went into the shared folder Ethan had insisted on creating months earlier. He'd sent a company-wide message about it, talking about collaborative workflows and breaking down information silos. What it really meant was he wanted access to everyone's files without having to ask. For the next fiscal year. The consultant typed something, then asked why the confidence intervals were narrower than the historical variance would suggest. Basic question. Valid concern. The kind any competent presenter would have anticipated. Ethan stared at the slide like it had betrayed him. Could you clarify that question? The intervals don't match the data range you showed in slide 3, the consultant pressed. The variance should be significantly higher based on the methodology you described. Either the intervals are wrong, or the methodology is wrong. Which is it? Ethan looked at me for the first time since I'd sat down. Just a quick glance. Like a drowning man scanning for a lifeguard. I kept my face neutral. Said nothing. He turned back to the screen, started saying something about preliminary calculations and ongoing refinements. Elizabeth cut him off. These aren't preliminary. This is the presentation. This is what you're showing us right now. David leaned forward. Walk us through the regression model step by step, from data input to final projection. The next 4 minutes were the longest of Ethan's career. He clicked through slides he clearly hadn't reviewed, stumbled over terminology he didn't understand. At one point, he admitted he wasn't sure which data source fed into the primary projection. David stopped taking notes. The consultant was typing something on his phone. Sarah's face had gone from neutral to stone. One of the VPs actually stood up and walked to the back of the room, poured himself water. The kind of deliberate movement that says, I need to physically distance myself from this disaster. The CFO raised his hand. Stop. Ethan stopped. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the projector. Who built this model? The question hung in the air. Ethan's mouth opened. Closed. Then he made the move I'd been waiting for. Michael handled the technical build. He's our senior quantitative analyst on this account. Every head in the room turned. 14 pairs of eyes landed on my corner seat. I opened my laptop, pulled up the version history, pulled up the access logs. Then I found the file with the watermark buried in the speaker notes. Draft version 2.3 internal review only. Those files are labeled preliminary drafts, not client-ready, I stated calmly. Ethan accessed them from a shared folder at 11:47 p.m. last Tuesday without requesting the final version. The watermark in the speaker notes confirms he's presenting the draft I explicitly flagged as incomplete. Sarah's eyes narrowed. The CFO pulled out his phone. Elizabeth leaned back, with the expression of someone watching a building collapse in slow motion. Ethan started talking fast. Defensive. Loud. Something about miscommunication and workflow issues. His voice went up half an octave. The confident smile was completely gone. I pulled out my legal pad, flipped to a page with dates, timestamps, and file names. 17 entries spanning 4 months. Each documenting unauthorized access, forwarded emails, presentations stolen word for word. The CFO asked to see it. I handed it over without hesitation. The meeting ended 14 minutes later. Sarah asked everyone except Ethan to leave the room. The Titan executives left without shaking anyone's hand. I walked back to my desk and ate my turkey sandwich while the server hummed in the silence. 2 hours later, legal sent a company-wide email. Subject line, * litigation hold, Titan Energy engagement. Do not delete, modify, or move any files related to the Titan account. Preserve all communications, * Ethan didn't get escorted out by security. That's not how it works. What happened was quieter. He got walked to HR by Sarah and 2 people from IT. No handcuffs. No perp walk. Just a quiet conversation followed by a supervised desk clearing. The audit revealed he'd done this at his previous company, too. Rising star, who produced impressive results until someone looked too closely. He left with a generous severance and an NDA. Titan didn't terminate immediately. They put the contract under review. Elizabeth sent a formal letter requesting all methodology documentation and a complete audit. 14 business days to comply. Sarah assigned it to me. I spent 70 hours over 2 weeks rebuilding everything from scratch. Real analysis. Clean data. Proper coefficients. confidence intervals that matched the variance. I delivered it to Elizabeth during a video call that ended with her saying, "This should have been what we saw the first time." The contract survived. Barely. Titan reduced the scope by $400,000 annually, added accountability clauses, and named me primary contact. 3 weeks later, Sarah called me into her office. First time I'd been invited to sit in one of her chairs. She didn't waste time. "You knew those files were drafts. You knew he'd take them anyway." Not a question. A statement. I told her the files were clearly labeled. I'd sent him an email warning him. If he'd read a single file properly, none of this would have happened. She stared at me. "You're the only one who documented this well enough to protect the firm. That's the only reason we're not in worse shape." I didn't respond. "The interim head of data strategy position is open. Effective Monday." She named a number. 43% higher. Plus equity. Plus a corner office with a window. I said I'd think about it. She told me to think fast. I accepted Friday. Started Monday. Same 714 badge in. Different floor. 2 weeks later, in a courtroom that smelled like old carpet, the judge signed. Permanent guardianship. 3 months passed. The interim tag got removed. Life settled. Better office. Bigger responsibility. Same turkey sandwich. So, when Ethan came to me, asking for a favor, asking for mercy, I remembered all of it. Every late night. Every stolen credit. Every risk to my daughter's future. Was there anything left for me to gain from his suffering?